Oh, it's that time again. Shows are coming to an end and decisions have to be made. What shows will pass judgment and what shows will fall into the pit of forgotten anime? This season hasn't been great, but to be fair, the winter seasons rarely are. Though there have been some shows that have piqued my interest, so without waiting any longer, let's check them out. Starting off at number 10 is Junketsu no Maria, a comedy ecchi show that takes place in the 14th century. And it has some okay ideas about politics of the time, but everything is overshadowed by its pure use of sexual humour. For every serious point the show tries to make, it proceeds to shove unfunny jokes about sex and random ecchi moments in your face. The show has no respect for its characters or its story, and rarely tries to take its themes seriously. I'll give it points for its premise, but its poor execution makes me only recommend this to fans of the ecchi genre. Kofuku Graffiti is a show that kickstarted itself off with a very impressive first episode. A unique art style, interesting ideas, and promise for future theme exploration. Instead, as the show goes on, we're given repetitive episodic stories that go nowhere, bland characters, and an overall boring, dragged out experience. A real shame to have wasted such a nice art style and interesting premise. But hey, you can't win them all. Sengoku Muscle is, yep, you guessed it, another Sengoku period anime. Chances are you've already seen an anime, movie, or played a video game that has already done the Sengoku period much better. That's not to say this show isn't worth watching. The action scenes were fairly entertaining and the character designs are quite cool, but the story isn't that well written and the characters are too over-exaggerated. The Sengoku period has been covered so many times before, you really need to do something unique to stand out, and the show didn't do that. Seeken is a rather light-hearted school comedy show that centres its humour around various anime and video game culture references. Referential humour really is one of the lowest forms of comedy. It leaves no room for originality or any actual humour, especially when the jokes are about otaku culture. But I don't really mind that. There are many examples of things pulling this type of humour off. Seeken is not one of them. This show, for the most part, just references stuff. There's very little actual comedy. The other elements of the show were pretty standard. The animation was fairly good, the art looked nice, and the characters were bearable. Overall, it's no more than another standard otaku comedy, but it's not terrible. Assassination Classroom is a comedy show about a class of kids who have to kill their teacher. The show doesn't really have much of a story at all since the simple premise doesn't allow for one. There are way too many characters to develop, and even when characters are focused on, any attachment is ruined by poorly timed jokes and comedic moments. The show doesn't even look good. The animation is close to nothing. There's very little movement in the scenes. I mean, the main character's mouth doesn't even move when he's talking, and that's pretty basic. So it seems this show has nothing going for it, and that's not too far from the truth, but the show does work as a very light-hearted comedy to watch occasionally. It's not too over the top and doesn't overplay the annoying anime stereotypes. This show will be instantly forgotten once it finishes, but it does pass as an okay watch for 20 minutes a week if you're a comedy fan. Yoro no Yatterman really presented itself as one of the best shows of the season, and after watching the first episode I was convinced that this would be one of my favourites. The show instantly marks its style with wacky character designs and a slightly surreal story, but for some reason, after 3 or 4 episodes, its initial charm is dropped and replaced by the usual episodic adventure stories that have no personality at all. I was really disappointed at how such a promising show could fall back and play it safe with such unoriginal stories. It's still worth watching and is still one of the nicest looking shows of the season, but it's not the show I first thought it was. The Rolling Girls is a nice, simple adventure show that doesn't try too much, but hits what it does try pretty accurately. The show doesn't offer much in terms of a story or structure, but it creates some nice episodes with an enjoyable cast of characters. The art style is really the show's saviour. It's creative, unique, and fits well into the world. The world is very well presented, and you get a nice feeling of its scale and design. The show is fairly well animated, and the characters look good. Overall, a visually impressive series that just lacks a little in its narrative. Yurikuma is possibly the most interesting series to start this season. It's almost impossible to really get any kind of impression of the show for the first few episodes. The show only really starts to make any narrative sense around 4 or 5 episodes, a trait that most of Kunihiko Ikuhara's anime hold. Loved by some, disliked by others, he has a very unique style of directing. Ikuhara is involved with pretty much every aspect of the show, from the directing, to the storyboarding, to the sound. This is very much his show. I can't say I'm a massive fan of his work, but I do enjoy watching them, and Yurikuma is no exception. It's unique, fun, and manages to stay fairly engaging despite its random presentation. It does use sex as one of its main focuses, something I'd normally consider an anime sin, but Yurikuma handles it with a touch of maturity. It doesn't throw boobs in your face for the sake of it. It creates a very interesting story around the themes of sex and homosexuality. Overall, an attractive and well-directed show that can't be taken too seriously, but doesn't need to be. After its impressive introduction at Anime Mirai 2013, everybody was nervously awaiting the full TV adaptation of Death Parade. So a one-episode special that didn't introduce much of a long story or set of characters will be adapted into a season-long TV series. This can only spell disaster, right? Thankfully not. Death Parade manages to create a very interesting and consistent storyline. It used the basics of the original short, but really is completely different. They very smartly set up a premise that with the help of a few extra plot points could easily stretch out into a full TV series. It allows the show to explore any type of character or situation, creating some extremely intense and emotional episodes. With well written characters and nice animation, Death Parade became one of the best shows of the winter 2015 season. I've always believed that space operas make the best stories. Gundam The Origin is a stellar example of this. When you have a nicely developed world full of politics and social elements, a touch of good writing is all you need to create a good show. And they take this even further, with fantastic character development, writing and world building. Gundam The Origin is a contender for being one of 2015's top picks. Not to mention the jaw-dropping animation and fitting soundtrack. The Origin has that classic space opera feel. This could seriously be one of the best written and best looking shows of the year. So that's been my top 10 of the season. If you have any shows that you feel should have been in the list, please post them in the comments. Remember to also subscribe to be notified of future videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.